Hello friends, my name is Miranda. Welcome to my universe. Today we are going to be talking about this mysterious shadow entity. We are going to be talking about the Boogeyman, specifically the 1973 short story by Stephen King and the 2023 movie that was recently released. However, before we begin, I do want to talk about the folklore behind this being because it is pretty fascinating. So hold on to your hats and glasses, strap on in. We got a lot of ground to cover. Universally, the Boogeyman is a creature that goes after misbehaving children, and he usually lives in the shadows, not to ever be seen. The story of the Boogeyman is usually told by parents to their children in order to hopefully scare them into good behavior. Like I said previously, there are many different names and spellings of those names for the Boogeyman, and many different cultures have their own interpretations of this creature. There's the Sackman, El Coco, Babao, and many others. Because of how many cultures have their own ideas or perceptions of the Boogeyman, it is pretty hard to trace back where the folklore originally began. However, the earliest tellings of Boogeyman stories can be traced back to 16th century England, where the Boogeyman was originally thought to be a sort of hobgoblin, aka a household spirit that tended to be mischievous. Now, most of what we have known about the Boogeyman up until about the 1970s was just hearsay. Everybody would talk about it, but nobody would really write about it until 1974 when Stephen King published his short story, The Boogeyman. After this, a lot of films began emerging. The Boogeyman all of a sudden became a very popular horror movie concept, with 3 movies being published in the UK back in 1980 and another series of 3 films being published in 2005. Stephen King's short story in particular was never adapted into anything that was shown in theaters. There were a few indie directors who created short films, but that was about it. Until 2023. The Boogeyman came out a mere few weeks ago, June 2nd, and I want to talk about it. The rest of this video will be a discussion of the 2023 film and Stephen King's 1973 short story, The Boogeyman. I will be spoiling both of these, so if you do not want to hear any spoilers on either the movie or the short story, fair warning, you might want to stop watching this video. Remember, stay safe. Keep the lights on. Let's start with the short story. Now, the structure of this is very simple. It only takes place through the duration of a therapy session between Dr. Harper and Lester Billings. The entire short story, for the most part, is just Lester telling Dr. Harper about how his children were brutally murdered and how he believes it is because this entity, this very dark creature, is haunting his family. Every single one of his children died in their bedrooms, and the night before it had happened, Lester always remembers his children telling him it's the Boogeyman. On multiple occasions, Lester finds that there are closet doors opening throughout his house when he specifically remembers closing them. Lester actually saw the creature hovering over the bed of his last born. He never told anybody about this, and for the most part, either the doctors or the police were able to write it off as specific incidents, very unfortunate incidents. The short story ends with Lester realizing that the therapist he was talking to this whole time was actually the Boogeyman. He walks into the office and the closet doors open and out emerges this creepy shadow monster that had murdered all of his children. At this point, the reader can assume that the Boogeyman takes hold of Lester as well, basically destroying their entire family. Now, the short story was okay, in my opinion. I read it a few months ago in preparation for watching the movie, and it was okay. I didn't hate it, but I also didn't really love it either. I feel like if Stephen King immersed the audience more in the now of when the children were actually attacked by this creature, it would have been way more scary. And I feel like it separated us from that moment because it took place in a therapist's office. There was no immediate danger. Up until the ending, of course, but besides that, I felt as though this short story wasn't very scary. That being said, when I was going to the movie, I was fairly certain that it would not be done in that structure. Maybe there would be a therapist, but I predicted that it would not follow that same timeline because horror movies are all about scaring you in the now, jump scares, freaking you out as much as they can right then and there. So I figured it wouldn't be like oh, this is a telling of what had happened previously. And I was right. The film did, however, have a lot of bits and pieces of the short story within it. For example, the movie does have Lester Billings, and our main male character in the story is Dr. Will Harper. We follow him and his two daughters, Sadie and Sawyer, around their lives after their mother had passed away. Because Will is a therapist, he does take in-home appointments, and one day this man walks in. Who is it? Lester, of course. The therapy session does end with Lester dying, however, it is way more traumatic than in the short story. And after that, the family starts experiencing a lot of abnormal things around the house. The youngest daughter, Sawyer, has actually seen the boogeyman under her bed, sneaking around in the hallways, and she tries her hardest to convince the rest of the family that he is really there. Eventually, Sadie ends up seeing this entity too around the house when she's walking. Why this family doesn't leave hall lights on at night is beyond me. There is eventually this epic showdown between the boogeyman, the daughters, and their father in the basement. And what do you know? The basement ends up in flames. I did really like that ending because I feel as though it is an homage to Stephen King. If you have read a lot of his works, seen a lot of his movies, you would know that a lot of the times his stories either end with fire or water, and this was no different. At the very end of the film, the family goes to see their own therapist, so Will is there with them, and they talk all about their disparities. They go through their grief of the mom, and it's really sweet, very heartfelt. And then at the very, very, very end, Sadie hears her name being called by the therapist, and so she walks back into the office. The closet is ajar. Without another word, Sadie closes the closet door and leaves the office. And that is how the movie ends. I really enjoyed it. I actually enjoyed it more than I thought I was going to. I personally have very high expectations when it comes to horror films. It takes a lot to get to me. It takes a lot for me to enjoy a horror film. I feel like a lot of the times directors throw plot twists in there that throw off the entire movie, and I'm just not a huge fan of a lot of very popular horror films. I prefer the classics like 1990 It and the original Scream film. Those are actually two of my favorite movies of all time. So going into this one, I did have fairly low expectations. I figured it would be better than the short story, but I didn't think it would be that good, and I was pleasantly surprised. I wouldn't say that this is one of my favorites. I do think The Black Phone is one of the newer horror films that I enjoyed quite a lot, and The Boogeyman just isn't up to par with that. However, it is still a good, engaging watch. It had a lot of similarities with the short story. However, it was still just loosely based on it. The whole concept of this family that is grieving and having to go through that process on top of all of these traumatic incidents happening, it just made it deeper, in my opinion, and way more engaging in that way. However, this movie was very predictable. Another reason why I'm not a huge fan of recent horror films are because they follow this certain structure, right? There's this creature, and not everybody believes in this creature. Only one or two of the family members or the main characters think that it's real. They have to try to convince the others of its existence. They end up finding somebody else who is either older or has dealt with this creature in the past. They get advice from this person to try to defeat the creature, and then boom, the epic showdown. For the most part, horror films follow that plot line. So it was very predictable. The jump scares were very predictable. I like jump scares in the moment, but I always, once I leave the film, it's like I'm not even scared anymore because it was solely in the moment. However, this movie does follow you. It definitely does. It's very similar to Lights Out in that way, where you are kind of scared to turn the lights off and you leave lights on, and there's just that little tinkling in the back of your brain, that little voice in your head that's like, was that a shadow I saw? Overall, I would probably give the film a 7 out of 10. I did enjoy it. No huge complaints in any area besides it being very predictable. And I actually do think that it was better than the short story. Don't tell Stephen King that though. It was fun. I had a good time, lots of good scares. And yeah, I do recommend seeing the film. If you have any comments, questions, concerns at all, please comment them down below. I would love to answer those for you. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed our discussion today. I love you so much. Please be safe, make good choices, keep the lights on, and I will definitely see you next time. Bye! Also shut the closet doors.